study today, and as I was looking in the commentary, the guy gave a pretty good example of following instructions. And so talked about whitewater rafting, and I know that maybe some of you or your family has been whitewater rafting, and talk about the excitement that goes along with it. It says that it offers both the most exhilarating and the most terrifying experience you'll ever have. A person is having the most fun of a life while experiencing the greatest fear of a lifetime, and talks about what a rush it is, in doing that. Well, with every whitewater rafting adventure, the trip begins with the rafting guide meticulously going over the rules and the safety instructions. They say, you need to wear proper clothing. Life jackets are to be worn at all time. You have a protective helmet. You must keep it on always. Obey the commands of the guide. Learn to hold and use the paddle properly. Stay in the boat. And it says, repeat, stay in the boat. If you fall out of the boat, don't panic. Listen for the guide's instructions. Learn the proper swimming techniques. Don't stand up in the river. Each of these instructions is given to ensure that they have the best time of their life, but also to protect their lives, So it sort of tells you that if you don't think, serious things could happen to you, But even the best swimmers can find themselves in trouble if they don't use the proper swimming techniques in whitewater raftings. And the proper technique of floating on your back, feet downstream and knees slightly bent, head up, looking downstream, is designed to protect a person from the hidden rocks that could seriously injure them. The same is true for the rule of not trying to stand up in the river. The rapid water can quickly force your foot into a position between the rocks that could keep it wedged and could lead to a disaster. Above all else, it says, listen to the guide. Listen to them as they're helping you. And so their guidance comes from hours of training and weeks and months and years of experience in whitewater rafting. Following the instructions of the guide is essential. These rules are designed to provide maximum safety and maximum enjoyment while on the river. So we're going to get a whitewater rafting trip up. If any of y'all, after hearing this, if any of you are interested in wanting to go, we could do that, couldn't we? I don't think it'd probably be many takers. I'm not interested in it. So anyway, well, the other side of that, I think, and as I was reading this, something that came to my mind was the medicine commercials on television that lists all the side effects that the medicine can have. If you take this medicine, it will relieve you of this, this, and this, but it also may cause ... about 8 or 10 different things that they have to tell you. So, instructions are given for a reason and for a purpose. And, the same is true of navigating the river of life. God's instructions are designed to bring blessings of God into our lives. And they're also there to provide protection from all the things that can pull us down, And so God's instructions are not suggestions. Rather, his laws and commands are essential for living life to the fullest extent. And so following God's instruction is a constant part of God's plan for our lives as we live out this great adventure that we are involved in following him. Well, as we look today, we're going to be in Numbers chapter 33 and following, but we've sort of gone from Numbers 22 to 33, so there's a lot of things that have gone on in between there as well. But Numbers 26 talks about the start of a new beginning for the nation of Israel. The first generation is already gone, that left Egypt. They have died. It's been 40 years has passed since that first census was taken. If you'll remember, there was, I forgot how many thousand it was, maybe 660,000 men, something like that, I think. So now they're taking a new census of the men, and they're doing that in order to find out how much fighting power they have, and how many are 20 years of age and older, and they did that in in Numbers chapter 26, as they're taking this second census for military purposes. It serves as also as they begin to get into Canaan and start assigning the territory there for Canaan, and all of it is divided up in allotments to each tribe based upon the tribe's population size, and so larger tribes would receive larger portions of land, and special instructions, of course, were given to the tribe of Levi. They didn't possess any land. They would be assigned to some 48 cities throughout the area that they would be able to minister in and to take leadership in. And so of the previous generations of Israelites, only 3 were still alive. There was Moses and Joshua and Caleb of the previous generation. Moses, we talked about, wasn't able to enter the promised land. Joshua and Caleb were rewarded for their faithfulness to God. They had been to 2 spies and came back and from the exploring the promised land and had reported against the evil report that the other 10 had given. And Joshua had been Moses' assistant and was God's choice for succeeding Moses and leading of that nation. And so also in Numbers 27 was the ordination of Joshua and the transition of the leadership from Moses to Joshua. Well, sandwiched in between all of this concerning the counting of the people and the allotment of the land is a section of regulations regarding the different offerings that they would have to perform and take place in. And at the end of that and all the sacrifices, there were instructions and vows of the Lord that were mentioned. And so keeping these vows were definitely essential. And so anyway, it talked about all of that. In Numbers 31, the narrative concerning the preparation for entering the promised land continues with the war against the Midianites because they had led the Israelites into sins of idolatry and immorality. And so then that's followed by an explanation of the request of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh. They didn't want to go over into the east side of the Jordan River. They wanted to stay on the west side, but you could do that, but you're going to have to go over and fight for us and fight with us and help us to eliminate what's over there, and then you'll be able to move back across to the other side. So anyway, you can see all of this is going on, and a lot of instructions are being given from chapter 22 to chapter 33, where we begin today. God spoke to Moses while the Israelites were still camped there on the plains of Moab, just east of Jericho, and he instructed them to tell the Israelites that they would have to drive out the current inhabitants of the land and destroy the idols and high places devoted to the worship of the other gods. And so the land would belong to them, given to them by God. So Teresa, let's look at that as we look at Numbers chapter 33 and begin with verses 50 through 53.
Okay, let's read that. The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across the Jericho. Tell the Israelites, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all of the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy all of their stone images and cast images, and demolish all their high places. You are to take possession of the land and settle in it, because I have given you the land to possess. Okay, it is interesting just to turn to Numbers 33, because it has a listing of all of the places that the people stopped during the 40 years. And remember, they were camping. I love to camp. I like to tent camp. But I cannot imagine for 40 years having to set up the things that they set up, which would have been like tents. We're not, they would have been shelters, lean-tos. And we don't know how long they stayed at each place, but some places they would come and just almost immediately they would start again. And then other places they stayed for a few months, whatever. And of course, all this was by God's instruction. Moses was leading them, but he didn't make the decisions. He let God lead him and make the decisions. So Numbers 33 tells us about the Israelites' travel from Egypt to Mount Sinai. And God had demonstrated, his faithfulness everywhere these people went. And he had provided water, sometimes in odd ways, with the rock, that the water came from the rock. He had provided food, he'd provided manna for them, and then when they started complaining and said they were tired of the same thing, he provided quail. And so many times he had given them exactly what they needed. Now Moses' ministry was coming to a close. He would go to the edge of the promised land, he would be able to see it, but he would not be able to walk on it. And of course that was because of his anger when he struck the rock. Did we have that last week, a week before, whatever? He wouldn't enter it. Well, as Jerry said, God's people had camped in the plains of Moab, and they could look across the Jordan. They were on the shores, the edge of the Jordan River. They could look across and see the land that they were going to inherit, or that they had inherited. And so they were that close, and this was a very fertile body of land. It rained, there was abundant rain, and this was just perfect for growing. And so as the tribes that Jerry mentioned that wanted to stay before you crossed the Jordan, did it because they were the ones that had a lot of herds of whatever, cattle, sheep, whatever, camels, I don't know. But it was the best land. Well, I say the best land. I don't know if they realized what was over the river or not, but they saw that it was good for, feeding their animals. And so they asked if they could stay there. And of course, as Jerry said, God did allow that. So they're on the edge, and Moses is telling them, you're going to cross here, and you will be in Canaan. You'll be in the promised land. And I know there were a lot of them that were looking. I mean, this is 40 years after God parted the Red Sea, and so there would not have been anybody there that had been. I'm sure they had heard stories about it, except for Joshua and Caleb. And so I'm sure they were looking. This was flood stage. It was springtime, and the snows from Mount Hermon, which was to the north, would have been melting, and it would have made the Jordan River at high at flood stage. And I know the people looked at it and thought, how are we going to do this? I mean, there were not bridges, and I doubt there were many ferries. And so we know what happened. We know that God, when it came to that point, when they were ready to go into the land, he parted the Jordan River. And so, anyway, God has provided everything these people needed. He gave these people 3 objectives to accomplish. The first, they were to drive out all the inhabitants of the land. How were they going to do this? Well, we know that they had battle after battle after battle, skirmishes, big battles, whatever. And God always promised them victory. And so, it's hard to understand. God's instructions were, you drive them out, but usually he said, kill all of them. And of course this was, men, women, children, animals, whatever. God had given these people in Canaan 400 years. The 400 years that the Israelites were in Egypt, God was working on the people of Canaan, and he was trying to turn them toward himself. And for 400 years they had ignored him, and they had continued to worship their idols. And he said, okay, it's judgment time. I've given them a long time. I've begged them. I've sent people to preach to them and tell them, and I'm not going to do that anymore. So he knew that if they allowed some of the people to stay, that the bad would influence the good. You always, that's just a lesson in life. You put something good with something bad, most all the time, the bad's not going to influence, the good's not going to influence the bad to turn good. It's going to be the other way around. And God knew this, and so he said that was important. Also, second, God said they're to destroy all their stone images and their cast images. Now, the stone images would have been things that they had carved out or chiseled or sculpted from rocks. And, they just a variety. I mean, every time they thought of another god they could worship, they made an image to it. The cast images were things that they had constructed out of metal. And so over and over and over, they had these idols to represent these gods that they worshiped and that they sacrificed to. And, God had forbidden, the Bible says, graven images. He said, I'm here. You may not be able to see me, but I'm here. And I'm alive. You don't need to make an image to me. Don't worship anything. We're not to worship a person. We're not to worship a cross. We're to worship God in His spiritual image. The third thing was God's people commanded them to demolish all their high places. When they set up these sites or these altars and put these graven images there to worship, they almost always did it in a high place. And for some reason, it was a hill or a mountain or a big place in the road that was high. And God said, get rid of all those. Destroy all of the idols. Destroy all of the sites that they have turned into that. For some reason, God did not want the Israelites to set up altars in high places, but they continued to do that. And it said God was not pleased. I'm not sure what the reason. Well, God told Israel to take possession of the land, as He had told Abraham centuries before that his descendants would have a promised land. God said, I'm going to give it to them. And He said, first, they're going to be in a land that they don't possess, and this land is going to be bad to them. It's going to make them, and this was centuries before it happened, it's going to make them into slaves. And of course, that was Egypt. So God said, now I want you to cross over. I want you to get in here and settle it, and I want you to clear all the people out, clear all the false gods out. While God had promised them the land, He also expected them to act on the things that He instructed them to do. And I don't know if the people had more faith than the people 40 years before, or if they just got tired of traveling. This is a journey that should have taken 11 days. If they had gone straight to the promised land from Egypt after the Red Sea was crossed and they crossed that, 11 days they would have been there. But their obstinance, their lack of faith, their arguing and whining lasted 40 years before they were able to go into this promised land.
Yeah, and some of them didn't even get to go, did they?
That's right. A lot of them didn't.
Well, the land would be divided out by ancestral tribes, each tribe possessing its own land. And if Israelites failed to drive out the current inhabitants, again, God was telling them what they needed to do. The people would remain in the land and would become problems for them, And, all along, if you can remember back in the wilderness journeys and wanderings, a lot of the people that went with them when they left Egypt were Egyptians that also came along with them, and so if you remember, they were a lot of the ones that were sort of undermining, I think, Moses' authority and God and everything, and sort of putting doubts in their minds and all of this. So, God, again, He's telling them, these people that we're going in here to the promised land, these people that are inhabiting this promised land, you don't need to associate with them. You need to move them out. And so God's given them explicit instructions. In verse 54, He said, you are to receive the land as an inheritance by lot according to your clans. Increase the inheritance for a large clan and decrease it for a small one. Whatever place the lot indicates for someone will be his, and you will receive an inheritance according to your ancestral tribes. Casting of lots was something that was fairly common throughout the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. They cast lots when they decided who would replace Judas, as one of the 12 disciples. I think there was lots that was even cast and spoken there accordingly. Everything In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God created everything. So if he created everything, he owns everything. So all the land belonged to God. And it was his to do whatever he chose to do with it. It was his decision. It's his sovereign will, And so the Lord made the decision to give the land to Canaan, of Canaan, to his chosen people as an inheritance. And they were to view this land always as a gift from the Lord. Well, the census, as we talked about, of the people were so that they could sort of decide how they were going to divide up the land. And each tribe would receive a portion of the land based on the population size. So, some maybe had more people or had more births maybe going on during all of this time, and some clans became larger clans and others didn't. And so a larger clan definitely would need a larger portion of land, and a smaller would need a smaller portion of land. So all of this was done proportionately, and the distribution was accomplished by, like I said, the casting of lots. And the Israelites knew that the casting of lots was under divine guidance, and they would have recognized that it was the Lord who was guiding this selection process. And so because the allotment was from the hand of God, that there would be no room for what? No room for complaining or jealousies, okay? Because God was making the decision. And so there wouldn't be any of that, any jealousy or complaint of unfairness among the tribes of Israel. Whatever place the lot indicates for someone to be would be his. And so it wasn't talking about individual, it was talking about clans, and I guess the clan actually could go in and maybe divide up the portion according to the number of people in that area at that time. And so it talked about your ancestral tribes, and so this was pointing back to the origins of the tribe of Israel. And each one had been named, if you remember, for one of the sons of Jacob, with the exception of the two tribes that came from Joseph. And that was a divided tribe, and so that was Manasseh and Ephraim. And so these two tribes take the place of the original brothers Levi and Joseph, and like I said, the tribe of Levi didn't receive an allotment of land. They were assigned the task of assisting Israel with worship in the tabernacle, and so there was 48 different towns scattered throughout Canaan, and that was given for the Levites to live in. I think at one time I remember reading the number 8,500. That there was 8,500 Levites that actually was in charge of the tabernacle. That was setting the tabernacle up, taking the tabernacle down, storing the tabernacle, all of that was involved with the tabernacle. So anyway, so there was 48 different towns scattered throughout Canaan that would accommodate this number of Levites. Verses 55 and 56 says, but, here you go, here's the instructions now. If you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, those you allow to remain will become barbs for your eyes and thorns for your side. They will harass you in the land where you will live, and what I have planned to do to them, I will do to you. So God expected obedience from the people of Israel. Sometimes they obeyed, didn't they? Sometimes they didn't obey. So, here we go again. Each time they failed to act on the instructions that God gave them, there was always consequences that involved. And so 55 and 56 here, verse 55 and 56 is a stern warning of the consequences of disobedience to the instruction that the Lord was giving them. And he describing the situation Israel would face from any of the people that they didn't drive out of the land. And so allowing the various people groups to remain in the land wouldn't just be an inconvenience. It would result in those groups being, he said, barbs and thorns to torment the Israelites. Well, barbs, you know what a barb is. You've seen a barb before. You pull it in, it doesn't come out too good, does it? So you think about a splinter maybe that you stick in your hand and how painful it is and how you have to try to get it out and you can't get it out and it just stays in there. And guess what? The longer it stays, the more it festers and becomes infected. And so this is what they're talking about here, it can provide discomfort, infection. If not dealt with, if left unattended, it might even lead to blindness, So he's telling them, these people are going to be bad for you. They're going to cause problems. He says it also can sort of be like thorns, Well, we know how that is. Thorns in the side of the Israelites and a constant source of harassment. It's always there. It's just a constant prick, that's going on there. And so allowing these pagan groups to remain in the land echoes other warnings that were given to the Israelites. And so the book of Judges gives a vivid picture of the harassment of Israel by the pagan people that were left in the land. It was a land of milk and honey if they did what God told them to do, but if they didn't, it was going to be a land of barbs and thorns. It's going to be a constant problem. And so not only will the consequences for disobedience come from people not driven out of the land, they would also come from God himself, because if you'll remember back over in verse 55, he said, what I do to them, I will do to you. Or what I would do to them, I would do to you. And so God warned that what I plan to do to them, I'll do to you. And so instead of the people of the land being driven out and disposed from the land and removed, the tribes of Israel would be driven out and they'd lose their possession. And so, of course, later on Joshua would warn the Israelites using this same type of language. Well, the tribes of Israel failed to fully drive out and destroy the prior inhabitants of Canaan. And so Israel definitely was infected with idolatry again, characterized the nation for centuries. And their idolatry, their disobedience to God, led to the exile and the disappearance from history of the 10 northern tribes of Israel in 722. And if you remember, the southern tribes, or the southern kingdom of Judah, fell in 586 BC to Babylon, and they were in exile to Babylon for years and years and years. And so, the children of Israel would learn the hard way through the years that failure to follow the Lord's instructions definitely leads to disaster, and it does have consequences. So Moses detailed the plan each ancestral tribe would receive, the land, and 9.5 tribes lived west of the Jordan, and 2.5 tribes lived to the east. And so, Teresa, let's finish up there in chapter 34, verses 13 through 15.
Okay. So Moses commanded the Israelites, "This is the land you are to receive by lot as an inheritance, which the Lord commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes. For the tribe of Reuben's descendants and the tribe of Gad's descendants have received their inheritance according to their ancestral families, and half the tribe of Manasseh has received its inheritance. The 2.5 tribes have received their inheritance across the Jordan, east of Jericho, toward the sunrise." Okay, so as Jerry said, Moses is, by God's instructions, commanded the Israelites regarding the distribution of the land, and it was done by population. How big an area would they need? So the land really belonged to God, but He was going to give it to His promised people, and He just told them they had to conquer it. But it was theirs. I mean, there was no problem. He would help them, and He would give them victory in all of the battles that they had. So the area before they crossed the Jordan was where Reuben and Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh decided they would stay because of that fertile land. And so as Jerry said, Moses looked at them when they said, "We want this," and he said, "Okay, now, you gotta go across, and you got to help when the 9.5 tribes are settling theirs, because there are going to be battles. So the Israelites had already battled for this land on this side of the Jordan. And so the people said, yes, we will. We'll go across, we'll help them, and then we'll come back home. He just gave an outline here of Reuben and Gad. Reuben's descendants came from Jacob and Leah's firstborn. Okay, remember, Leah was the not-so-favorite wife. You know, Jacob really wanted to marry Rachel, her sister, and Laban, their father, tricked him into marrying Leah first, and then he also allowed him to marry Rachel. But because Leah was the favorite, Rachel was the favorite, Leah kind of had to take a lot. I'm sure she had a lot of heartache in this. But Reuben is the oldest of Jacob's sons, and when Joseph's brothers decided to kill him because he was the favorite son, and he showed it, and Jacob showed it, and so the other brothers, they didn't like him very much, and they thought he was putting it down their throats that I'm the favorite, and so they decided to kill him. Well, Reuben was the good guy in this, and he said, we can't kill him, let's do something else. And so he saved Joseph's life, but the brothers still wanted to sell him, and so he still was sold into slavery, which started the whole Egypt thing, of course. So all of it was in God's plan. But Reuben messed up, and it was the problem that so many of the men of the Bible had. It was women. And he slept with one of his father's, it was one of his mother's handmaidens. And also she was a concubine to his father. And so that was really as a result of that sin, and believe me, sin will find you out no matter what it is. Jacob stripped him of the blessings of the firstborn. And so that was a very harsh punishment, but I'm sure he deserved it. Gad's descendants came from Jacob through Zilpah, and she was also one of Leah's handmaidens. Gad was Jacob's seventh son. Manasseh was Joseph's firstborn, but Jacob adopted him. Remember that Joseph is Jacob's favorite, and so he has given them more than he gave the others. Jacob would have the bigger inheritance, or his sons would. And so, anyway, they would take the place of Reuben, who would have inherited very much as the firstborn. So anyway, I think we've already talked about the Reubenites and the Gadites initially had asked for Moses' blessing to live in that certain area, and so that's what they did. Now Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh, was so large that they eventually had to ask for some land across the Jordan where the rest of them went because of the population. So these tribes were where they needed to be. God had given instructions, and so here they are finally after 40 years they're in the promised land. So we'll see what happens another time.
Well, we finally got them there.
Finally
so
got them there.
That's been the thing. We have traveled through 7 lessons about getting them into the promised land, and finally got them there. And it's the land, we're told, a land of milk and honey, but you still have to do some things in order for it to be the land that God said he would give you and be perfected. And so, as we do today in our lives, we all fall short of what God expects us to do and to honor him and to follow his instructions. And there are consequences to that. And so, Israel remains politically and geographically important. Even today, we've had a lot about Israel, haven't we, in the last several days. And it's most vital because this is the land where God sent his son and where he launched the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so we see this today, and blessings of the Israelites finally. They finally have their own land, and now they have to deal with what happens there. And so today we've seen that following God's instructions often requires us as believers to remove potential distractions from our lives, just like he told them to remove those distractions so that they could receive his blessings. There's things in our lives that we need to remove from our lives so that we can have a personal relationship with him, and then we can expect to encounter challenges while following God. Each and every day we face those challenges. There's something that will cause you to not acknowledge God as your Lord and Savior, a situation you may be put into where you're questioned about your Christianity or your relationship with God, and instead of stepping forward and taking charge, we hold back sometimes when we need to say something about that. And so we do run into those encounters often, but we can know and trust that God is with us through all of these times. He's with us daily. He's here to guide us, to direct us, to lead us, to provide for us, to take care of us. All he asks is that we depend on him and just surrender our lives to him. And so we need to thank him today for his faithfulness in fulfilling his promise, that his promises to us, and for the provisions that he provides for each and every one of our lives. Next Sunday, we're going to be moving on into Deuteronomy. We'll begin there with Deuteronomy chapter 4, and we're going to be looking at a lesson entitled Remember, and we'll see that recalling God's past faithfulness leads us to worship him. And we can look back through history today and see God's faithfulness and know that he is that faithful, that same faithful God today in our own lives. So be prepared and ready as we look into Deuteronomy beginning next Sunday. So for Teresa Henry, for the TV ministry here at First Baptist Church, I'm Jerry Price, hoping you have a great day in the Lord, and we look forward to being with you again next Sunday as we journey into life and work. Thank you for being with us today.